This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, good morning again, everybody, and welcome to number 12 of this session of Wandering Through the Big Book. And we're in more about alcoholism, the third chapter. And last week we got through the first part of the chapter and got through the story of a man of 30, and so today we're at the point where we're going to start off with Jim. But I just wanted to make a few points before we got going. During the last session, we talked again about the three stages of our disease, the disease of alcoholism, that being the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. And so I had some text correspondence with somebody talking about Bill talking about going into the fourth dimension, and just some discussion about, what is this, the fourth dimension? And it just reminded me that for me, because we get to approach this stuff any way we want. The fourth dimension, I believe for me, is the spiritual dimension. I spend most of my time in body, mind, and feeling. So for me, those are the three dimensions that I'm most clearly aware of. How my body, its reality, my mind, what I'm thinking about, and then kind of the intersection of the body and the mind, which are my feelings. At least that's the way it is for me. It's an interaction between the thinking of my mind and the form of my body. So then on top of that, there's this spiritual dimension, which for me personally would be my soul. And I don't feel it as much. I mean, my body and my mind and my emotions have always been strong and very present for me. And the idea of my spirit has not been so well, let's just say my body, mind, and feelings have always dominated my life, and it takes me a fair amount of work to get into the spiritual dimension. I've had enough experience of it that I don't doubt its reality, and I've done enough reading around the life of the soul and what happens to the soul. It enters a human a fetus being in gestation or whatever you call it, and it merges with the body and the mind, and people that are really aware of it will sometimes feel schizophrenic because they feel like there are these two things going on: the human reality and then the spiritual reality. But my body and mind and feelings have always been so strong that getting to the spiritual dimension has just been a real challenge, and why I find it very important for me, and also in discussions with others, and particularly newcomers, to remind everybody that if we're going to succeed in overcoming our disease of alcoholism, first we got to understand it to some degree, but ultimately we have to form this relationship with whatever you call it. I mean, I can call it the spiritual dimension, and that's okay. If you want to call it God, that's okay. If you want to call it higher power, that's okay. Whatever will work. Our system it's so good in that it gives us great freedom to. In fact, it's more than that. It's not gives us great freedom. It says this will only work when you are in touch with your own conception of what this spiritual aspect of your life means, and what in my case, I hope you won't find this pretentious. I've always considered myself a person of duty. I feel obligations to my life. I felt obligations to my parents, to my siblings. I've been married more than once. I feel an obligation to my wife in that relationship. The deepest, hardest obligation for me is the one I feel for my children. It's just, and they're adults for crying out loud. Um, so, but my allegiance has always been to my body and my mind. I've always been trying to feel better about mentally from the beginning. These questions plagued me of, how did I get here? What's this about? What am I supposed to do while I'm here? And um, most importantly, why can't I feel better than I do? I was so miserable for most all of my life, in spite of having a good life. I'm intelligent. I'm okay in the world in many different ways, but I've always been miserable. Um, and that misery didn't really, I tried to block out that misery with alcohol, but it did not really change until coming into AA and doing what we do and starting to learn about the dysfunction of my human condition. The fact that I had to drink to make it through the day. I had to drink to settle these feelings inside of at the bottom of it all was absolutely fear. I know that today. There were times, though, I thought anger was my problem, or I thought remorse was my problem. But they're really, though, and those are the big three, the things that we inventory. We inventory um, anger, we call it resentment. It's a form of anger. And we inventory fear, and we inventory remorse, our sense of guilt or shame or whatever about our selfish conduct. It's not about sex. It's about, how we are in the world. And so sometimes I would get distracted maybe by, I just got to solve the resentment problem, or I've got to solve the remorse problem, but they're ultimately fear. And one of the remarkable things to me about page 68, which is the fear page, is it explained to me for the first time why I fear. I fear because I have no relationship with my creator. I have no relationship with my spiritual being. All I've got is my relationship with my mind and my feelings and my body. That's all I've got. And this thing is saying, it's very insulting if you're an intellectual person. It's saying you fear because your self-reliance fails you. Oh, don't tell me that. I'm trying to prove that my self-reliance can bring me to a good life. And this thing says your self-reliance fails you. And that's why you fear, because you don't have any alternative other than your self-reliance. The only thing you've got to guide you is your mind. And you're so obsessed, I'm saying you, but I mean me. You're so obsessed with how you're thinking and feeling and the state of your body that you can't possibly ask the spiritual part of being, your soul, your unsuspected inner resource, as the spiritual appendix calls it. You can't ask it for help. You're not even sure it's there. That's the fear of agnosticism. I'm going to say my problem is not alcoholism. My problem with the reality that I cannot drink safely. I cannot take one drink without another debacle, as the book's going to say. That's not my problem. My problem is I'm agnostic. My problem is self-reliance is all I've got. I can't go to a higher power. I can't go to the spiritual dimension of my life. So when we get into these stories and we're talking about the jaywalk, which for me, the jaywalk, this is stupid. don't talk to me about jaywalking. That's ridiculous. I mean, I could not see my own insanity. Well, that's a little poem there. I could not see my own insanity. I couldn't relate to the jaywalker. You know how we ask, are you a friend of Bill's? I like to go, how do you feel about jaywalking? Just because it's really symptomatic of our insanity. That story is about insanity. And yet how many of us that have based our lives on our minds and our mind's ability to, so to speak, get us out of trouble. That's what I think. My mind's been, I'm still here after 76 years. So, I'm going to tell you that's because of my mind. My mind's kept me out of trouble and kept me reasonably healthy, even though I drank for 50 years. So what I'm trying to say is, especially if you're involved with newcomers, this is a long haul deal. And you see time and time again, people come into the program, they get sober, their lives improve, and then what happens? They drift away. Or you get people that come in here and they do the stuff and their lives get way better and they white knuckle it into 20 years or 30 years. And then what happens? They commit suicide. Whoa. And there are others that recognize that something is happening in their life, that they are developing this relationship with the spiritual dimension of their lives. They get something we call conscious contact, where all of a sudden, every sentence in the book becomes true. And every sentence in the book becomes a time for me to ask a question. Page 68. We are in this world to play the role God assigns, true or false. Am I in this world to play the role God assigns? Sorta. I'm trying. But the truth is, I extend great editorial power over this role that I've been assigned. I'm just, well, I don't know about that, or I need it this way, or maybe. It's a huge line. And then it goes on to say it's our reading number, whatever it is, the last one, the one Robin read, just to the extent that I try to play the role that God is assigning me, I will experience serenity in the midst of the calamity. Now, the problem, especially with newcomers, is, I think, that, we stop somewhere. We get sober, things get better, then we start working on the sanity part, because the important thing to me about understanding those 3 columns, we talked about it last week, it's the introduction to the study guide, page 20, lays out these 3 columns: physical, mental, spiritual. And each column, it asks, do you understand the symptom by which you know you've got this part of the disease? And it moves horizontally across. So the symptom by which I know I have a physical allergy is I can't have one drink. I can't take it or leave it. If I have one, I've got to have more. That's an abnormal reaction to alcohol. The goal is sobriety. But that's not the end. Then you move over to this sanity column, and this more about alcoholism is a lot about the sanity column. The insanity of the jaywalker, the insanity of Jim the car salesman. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind, I can drink safely, blanking out the reality of the allergy. Thus starts one more trip to the asylum. for old Jim. So then this approach also says, well, what do I do about my insanity? What's the treatment of my insanity? And the treatment in our system is steps 4 through 9, a detailed, tedious, ugly examination of our feelings of resentment, fear, and remorse, where we're going back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. All that stuff. We're looking at the parts of ourselves we do not like. And the reason is, until we can do something about those and get free of those, how are we going to have a relationship with the spiritual soul, with God, with whatever you want to call it? I can't. I'm too consumed with me. All I'm thinking, people say it all the time. All I think about is me. My resentments, my fear, and my remorse. That's what I'm thinking about. And until we do something to clean that out, how am I possibly going to ask God to direct my thinking? That's the ultimate challenge here in step 11. The second part of step 11, first part's when we retire at night. Second part is on awakening. Here's what we do. We do this stuff. And as part of that, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that our thinking be divorced, an ugly, ugly word, be divorced from self-pity, self-delusion, self-seeking. That's all the ego ever does. And we're asking, and I've never been able to do it. I'm too much of a control freak to ask God to direct my thinking. I have to go through a side door of saying, well, here's what I'm thinking. Can you give me a red light or a green light or a yellow light? That I can do, because I get a sense pretty quick. For one thing, it's not intellectual. I'm an intellectual, but when I picture a red light, a green light, a yellow light, that works. Here's what I'm thinking. I want to go tell so-and-so off. I think they need me telling them off. Red light, green light, yellow light. I can make that work. And I have to say that well, I'm going to get off here a little bit, but just if I get lost, I want to get back to we're talking about in the sanity column of 3 columns: body, mind, spirit. So I went through this deep depression that lasted a full year, with an entry into it and an exit from it that took another year, where I was as miserable as I've ever been my whole life, cold stone sober. And what totally blew my mind was I never thought about drinking, never seriously thought about drinking. I couldn't believe that, because it was like, we have alcohol in our home, and I couldn't believe that I never really thought. I thought about killing myself, but I did not think about drinking. And what came up eventually were a couple of ideas. One was from step 10, how can I best serve thee? Thy will not mine be done. Some people call it the 10th step commandment. That's the only thing I'm actually supposed to be thinking about. Are you kidding me? That if I could somehow, because depression is such a big topic for alcoholics, bedevilments, trouble with personal relationships, couldn't control our emotional natures, prey to misery and depression, right there. And I started thinking, if you ever get through this, because when you're in it, you don't think you're coming out. People would say this too will pass, and I would say, it ain't passing. It ain't going anywhere. It comes down like a heavy cloud and totally ruins the day. And I did this for a year. So the thoughts that got me out of it were, one, if I ever do get out of this, if I don't kill myself, I'm going to have some experience that's going to be relevant and valuable to other people. But the other one was the second part of step 2. You know, it's a 2-part deal. And hopefully we're going to get to it next week when we get into We Agnostics. The first is a yes or no question. Do I believe that there is a spiritual power greater than my mind and greater than my body? Can I simply say yes to that question? That's the easy part. The second part is, do I believe this power can restore me to sanity? That's a tougher one. And for me, that's what really came up. And I was laying in my bed 20 out of 24 hours, doing nothing. And eventually I started asking this power to heal me. And it must have worked because I'm still here. I haven't taken my own life. But that's been a big frickin' deal for me. So this middle column, this mental aspect of the disease, what the way this page 20 in the introduction to the study guide works is you name it, you talk about the symptom by which you know you have it, you disclose the treatment of it, and then you look at the promises of treatment. It's a very powerful, I think, exercise. And I got into it when I was doing these live workshops before the pandemic and all of that. And I really think it's valuable because once you've got it to some degree, then you can figure out, well, where did I go wrong, or what have I not done? Because what happens in here is that there are a lot of people that get through, usually they'll get through 5, and they are unloaded of a lot of intellectual crap, and they've learned they can't believe their own thinking as much as they once did, but they stop. They don't go on to 6 and 7, which is where you're actually asking God to heal you. I pray that you now remove from me anything and everything that stands in the way of me being useful to you and to my fellows. It doesn't say that stands in the way of my personal serenity. We don't get that. This is a real service-based healing and non-organization. It's the most amazing non-organization I've ever been a part of. And I'm an organizer. So they stick with the promises of the 4th and 5th step, which are immense. But don't move on. Some people call it a park. You know, there's several parking lots, and there's a parking lot before step 4, and there's a parking lot after 5. We feel so much better. We stop, and we don't go on with 6 and 7, and particularly we don't go on with 8 and 9. Because if you do 6 and 7, you're going to wind up in 8 and 9. And you're going to understand that you can't do 8 and 9 without this relationship, and you can't get this relationship without doing 8 and 9. So it's kind of like what do you call those things? It's whatever it is, chicken and egg thing. I can't do amends without this relationship, and I can't get this relationship without amends. So then the best way for me was to go into it, get into the ones that I'm ready for, and hold off on the ones that I'm not ready for. Took me 2 years. Okay, physical, mental, spiritual. Mental, what do I call it? Well, if we get to it, My favorite one is Fred, because I am like Fred. I even was an accountant. And Fred talks about those strange mental blank spots. And what he's saying is, I have a fantastic life. I live in a beautiful home in a beautiful town with a beautiful wife, and you know, I got no reason for being miserable, for sure. And I've been plenty miserable. So I've lost my and that's the way Fred was. Great life, great kids, great business career, respected by his partners, respected by the world, no reason for drinking. And yet he had this strange mental blank spot. Strange because it's it's not in sync with the rest of his life. His life looks great. Strange mental blank spot with regard to alcohol. And his whole thing, I hope we get to it, it's just beautiful, because this is where the self-knowledge comes up. Self-knowledge will not fix it. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of people in here still trying to make their self-knowledge work, still living fundamentally a human existence driven by the body and the mind, not, I don't want to use the word driven, but not driven by the spirit. So what do I call the mental part? The strange mental blank spot. Some people call it the obsession. Some people call it the queer mental twist. Whatever works for you. How do I know I've got it? How do I know I've got a strange mental blank spot? Well, the answer is on page 24, I'm pretty damn sure. I'm unable to recall at certain times with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation that I experienced the last time I took the first drink, the desperate experiment of the first drink. Maybe it'll work this time. And then it says right beneath that, there is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps us from putting our hand on a hot stove. The failure of the hot stove defense is how I know I have a strange mental blank spot. Because I've done the same thing over and over again and have not been able to make the connection between that first drink and what's coming later. I was trying to stop at drink number 3 or maybe 4 and never could and never understood it and had I thought the mind was everything. No awareness that my body made that impossible. So the failure of the hot stove defense is as much a symptom of the mental part of our disease as fear is of the spiritual part of the disease. What do I call it? I'm agnostic. And how do I know I'm agnostic? Because I experience fear. Why do I experience fear? Because of the failure of my self-reliance. I can say that today. I didn't get it for a long time. And I don't think we do get it till we actually feel not so much God directing. I don't feel God directing my thinking, but I do feel I get something when I ask a certain kind of question. And it happened for me after a year and a half or something, when I prayed for the removal of fear, and I got in no fear of financial insecurity. I got in no uncertain terms, Jack, you can be the person I want you to be, and you don't have to be rich to be that person. It blew my mind, because my mind said, of course, I understand that. I can be the person my creator wants me to be, and it doesn't matter what circumstances I am in. That was me needing to be rich so I could be the person I wanted me to be. That was my agenda, my human agenda. And here I am getting a clear and strong message. It changed my prayer life for sure. Before that, I'm not sure I mean, y'all were telling me, prayer is a big part of this deal, but frankly, until that moment, I had no respect, I'll say, for the power of prayer. I thought this was all about self-knowledge, which is really, it's the power of the jaywalker story, if we ever get to it, that, there's the jaywalker, keeps doing this stuff, in spite of evidence that it's not working. That, let me say one other thing. So I came in here in the fall of 2009, and it took me 4 months to get an honest sobriety date. I lied about my sobriety date, and I don't want to lose my track here. So 10 years later, I go into this depression, and I theoretically understood powerlessness over alcohol. Yeah, I mean, we get that right away. Most of us get that right away. That's not hard. I did not understand powerlessness over my very own mind until I'm laying in bed 20 hours a day, as miserable as I have ever been. It wasn't about alcohol. It was about my powerlessness over me. Nobody wants to feel what you feel when in depression. Nobody. Everything sucks. Everything. I couldn't watch the news. A good friend shows up the door, and I'm up on the third floor, and I'm saying to Kathy, "No, I don't want to see him. Oh God, tell him to go away." And I can't remember what finally happened, but the fear that came up in me, I hate everything. Why would I want to see a good friend? Oh, that was powerlessness over me. Like the jaywalker is powerless over the idea of jaywalking. I could not do it. So I just want to move backward a second. So the treatment plan in the mental column is steps 4 through 9 to get us to something called sanity. But that ain't the end. This is about getting sober, coming to sanity, and serenity is the last part of the deal. And what do I do to get to serenity? 10, 11, and 12, every day, all the time. Whether you call it pause, ask and listen, and then do in accordance with how you're directed to do. Whether you call it 1, quit playing God, 2, invite God in, 3, do as directed. All the stuff before the third step prayer. No matter what it takes to get this relationship with a spiritual dimension, and if I'm able to do that, then I will be enabled to match the calamity with serenity. Now, how can that be? For me, the biggest thing, and this is recent experience for me, I've always been terrified by the idea of dying. I don't know what it was, just terrified. I'm not sure. And yet the evidence is out there. I'm going to die sooner or later. I don't, none of us get, what do they say? None of us get out of this alive. My sense of a soul inhabiting this human body has been of great comfort to me, because I know I can say to you today, I know my body's going to deteriorate and die. And I know that my soul is not. And that has removed a lot of, I mean, I have a lot of fear of senility and, you know, how it's going to go and all of that. I mean, somewhat, but so much stronger sense that as I have been led to AA and led in AA, I will be led at the moment of dying. And it's making my physical life less important, which gets me right back to good old Saint Ignatius, who's saying in his spiritual exercises, the primary purpose of your life is to love, honor, and serve your spiritual creator, and thereby do the work that your soul came here to planet Earth in the year 2023 to do. And he goes on to say something very insulting to most of us, very challenging. It doesn't matter if you have a rich life or a poor life, a long life or a short life, a healthy life or a sick life, an honored life or a dishonored life. It does not matter. The only thing that matters is your relationship with your spiritual creator, and that you're able to quit playing God, invite God in, and do as directed. That's what matters. And that is the heart and soul of what we do here. The first part is just getting to that relationship. And the second part is living out of that relationship instead of being powerless over the body and the mind's fears and desires. Geez, we haven't even looked at the book. I better do something, or, you know, I'll have to talk till 9:30, and I'm determined to try to talk less and leave a little more room for. Okay, we talked about Jim. He made a beginning. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. This is always the problem. When people don't stay here, it's because they fail to enlarge their spiritual life. How am I going to enlarge my spiritual life? Steps 10, 11, and 12 every day, all the time. No exceptions, no matter what. No time off. And Jim, I mean, it's just suddenly the thought crossed my mind. You know, it doesn't have that if I put whiskey in milk, I'll be okay. It can be something else. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind. If I go shopping, if I go to Amazon, I'll be okay. And I love, suddenly the thought crossed my mind. So I order whiskey and put it in my milk. I vaguely sensed I wasn't being any too smart. You know, that's the spirit, that's higher power trying to get through. Not a good idea, Jimbo. Not a good idea. One more trip to the asylum, you know, but we only vaguely sense it. It's not strong enough to empower us to act on it. The experiment went so well. I've always, you know, and you couple that with the desperate experiment of the first drink. I love that they say the desperate. You know, we're trying one more time to see if it'll work. The desperate experiment of the first drink. Thus starts one more trip to the asylum. And later on, the insane, we call this insanity, lack of proportion, the ability to think straight. I'm on to page 37. In some circumstances, we've gone out to get deliberately drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. And then they move on to this idea of jaywalking. And, you know, and I'm telling you again, when I started to grasp my powerlessness over my very own mind, that was real terror. That was the worst fear of my life is I am doing this to me and I can't do anything about it. I tried 2 or 3 antidepressants. I tried speaking with different counselors. I tried everything. And thankfully, my sponsor said, you got to double up everything. No matter how many meetings you're going to, double them up. We started meeting twice a week. I started getting more serious about my reading and prayer time in the morning, and slowly climbed out of the hole I was in. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. This is on page 38. If we substitute alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. Ugh, that's hard. Oh, it doesn't fully apply. We've not gone as far as you fellas did. Blah, blah, blah. I'm on page 39, and this is really a good time to review the hard drinker. The difference with the hard drinker and us, a hard drinker's got the allergy, but if he gets a hold of a good enough mental idea that he can't take the first drink, he can stop. We can't. But the actual, it's the top of 39. This is really saying lack of power is your dilemma. Your lack of power over your own personality. The actual potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is not going to cut it. You've all frozen. I hope you can hear me. Oh, wait for it to come back. Oh, there you are. Sorry. Okay. And then we have the story of Fred at the end, page 39 and on. And I just really hope to focus on it more. On page 40, he talks about self-knowledge would fix it. You know, it takes him a while to understand that self-knowledge is not going to work. And they say that in the next paragraph on page 40. Here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, and he's flat on his back. Let him tell you about it. And then the beautiful words that he goes through talking about what happened and the ridiculousness of this. You know, he goes to Washington to this conference. The idea shows up, I'll just have one drink, and he blacks out for several days. And then it's on page 42 that he uses the word, those strange mental blank spots. It's up toward the top. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. You know, that's what I experienced in the Depression, a crushing blow that I couldn't deal with me. And I love what he says. It's at the bottom of page 42. They outline the spiritual answer in the program of action. The program of action, though entirely sensible, he mentally sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. This is steps 4 through 9. This is where we get the chance to throw these lifelong conceptions out the window. As we examine them, we disclose them to another, we pray for the removal of our old ideas, and we wind up in amends, trying to behave differently toward people that we have hurt. And then I love his sentence. Starts at the bottom of 42 and on to 43. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying, and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one. But you know what? I wouldn't trade its best moments for the worst that I have now. What a beautiful statement. And then he adds this, I would not go back even if I could. What he's saying is, I can't. I can't go back. I'm in this thing now. I'm not going back. And just as we end, it's a hard one to read. It's down in that many doctors and psychiatrists agree. And this doctor says, had you offered yourself as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Whoa. Whoa. Ouch. Okay. Thank you all. And so next week we're going to get into we agnostics, and I'm hoping to I want to bring up a more complete version of Bill's story. Let's see, Jennifer, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll have some open discussion. And I thank you all for your attention. Well, I guess I'm going to gong this gong. Why not?